right, Robby, what's on your radar today?
Well, Brianna, Kate Starbird is a University of Washington professor and the main character of a recent 60-minute segment about the spread of misinformation online. Starbird previously worked with the Department of Homeland Security to flag a purportedly inaccurate social media content for platform moderators, now in explicit hopes that the platforms would remove said content. Yet she told CBS News that the real victims of censorship were researchers like herself, who face increasing scrutiny from conservative media and congressional Republicans. Quote, "Are researchers being chilled?" asked 60 Minutes' Leslie Stahl. "Absolutely," Starbird replied. Let's watch some of this.
Did your research find that there was more misinformation spread by conservatives?
Absolutely. I think not just our research across the board looking at the 2020 election found that there was more misinformation spread by people that were supporters of Donald Trump or conservatives. And the events of January 6th kind of underscore this.
And yet she continues to speak up despite saying she's chilled. The National Press Club is hosting an event with her later this month. Its purpose is to help equip journalists to counter the spread of, quote, harmful mis- and disinformation, especially during times of crisis. She will share the spotlight with Tamoa Calzadilla, the editor-in-chief of FactCheckado, a group that combats misinformation aimed specifically at Latino voters. A PBS write-up of this site laments that Spanish-speaking immigrants from countries with recent histories of authoritarianism, socialism, high inflation, and election fraud may be more vulnerable to misinformation about those topics. One wonders why immigrants fleeing inflation and socialist repression would be less informed on these subjects than native-born citizens. Perhaps misinformation watchdogs are just worried that Hispanic immigrants might simply disagree with the Democratic Party's position on the extent of these problems. In any case, the misinformation fighting industry is growing bigger and bigger. CBS is set to debut a new news program, CBS News Confirmed, that is entirely themed around preventing misinformation. The show will identify and fight the spread of false stories, conspiracy theories, and bad facts, according to Variety. Meanwhile, misinformation watchdog groups are pressuring social media companies to do more to combat AI-generated misinformation. Miles Taylor, a former DHS chief of staff and author of the infamous "I Am a Part of the Resistance Inside the Trump Administration" op-ed, now works for an anti-misinfo tech group, and he warned Axios that governments and tech platforms are not doing nearly enough to deal with the AI threat. Thanks to the Twitter files, it's now public knowledge that an army of federal bureaucrats pressured platforms to censor misinformation related to elections, Hunter Biden, COVID-19, and other subjects. Whether these efforts violated the First Amendment is currently being litigated in front of the Supreme Court, but the platforms themselves clearly have grown annoyed with government guidance. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg is openly frustrated with how his company handled the feds, and Elon Musk's takeover of X, then called Twitter, was largely motivated by his self-proclaimed desire to resist such censorship. As a result, the government isn't talking to social media companies, Taylor lamented to Axios. Many of the social media companies don't want anything to do with the government, which means novel AI threats could get missed, end quote. Now, it's certainly true that bad information and, frankly, made-up nonsense circulates on social media, but the fundamental problem remains that our new self-appointed fact-checkers have not proven to be free from error themselves. Remember Nina Jankowicz, who was tapped to run the Department of Homeland Security's Misinformation Task Force? Well, she incorrectly identified the New York Post Hunter Biden laptop story as Russian disinformation. There's the Global Disinformation Index, a nonprofit group that incorrectly flagged the lab leak theory of COVID-19's origins as racist and conspiratorial. It is neither, as the Energy Department now believes it's the more plausible explanation. And third-party fact-checking organizations frequently lead social media platforms astray. It happens all the time. Misinformation experts would be welcome to contribute to the marketplace of ideas and set the record straight when they think false narratives are circulating online. But their preferred tactic is to shut down speech by working with the media, by working with nonprofits, and even with the federal government itself to extort social media platforms to bow to their wishes. This is not improving the discourse online, certainly not making the internet a better place. Now, for a good example of what can go wrong when a mainstream outlet decides to reflexively parrot the purportedly expert progressive consensus, see this article about NPR and Bari Weiss's The Free Press. NPR veteran journalist Yuri Berliner has tallied a number of instances over the years in which the publicly funded news organization succumbed to groupthink.
Yeah, you've been, I remember when this video first came out and you expressing frustration at the time, and I think you're completely right that there is a battle going on that is an ideological battle that keeps getting consistently framed as one about free speech and misinformation, and various sides are kind of wielding their purported commitment to the truth as an excuse as to why they should censor the other. And this has jumped the partisanship shark a very long time ago. There is an expectation that another one of these is anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism bills is going to be brought before Congress today to vote on defining away the ability of the majority of Americans, frankly, at this point, ability to articulate their frustration verbally using speech with Biden foreign policy in the Middle East. You've seen any number of professors losing their jobs, losing their ability to speak at institutions like the Y, which canceled, again, pro-Palestinian speakers that is now replacing that speaker with Bari Weiss, of all people. And all of the people who are engaged in these kinds of behaviors say, well, we have to protect the speech interests or the safety interests of college kids or whatever side that they happen to agree with, and use these kinds of ideas as a cudgel. And it certainly is true in the liberal sphere that you're talking about here, that misinformation has been their sort of version of these speech issues. I do wonder what to do about that, though, because ultimately, at the end of the day, I think that people feel justified in their position if they think that they are ideologically on the right side of it. So are we at a point where, frankly, talking about any of this as some kind of free speech hypocrisy is sort of beyond the point? Can't we just be in a place, should we, I should say, be in a place where we're just making arguments about what we believe and whether or not you agree with it? And if you don't agree with me, you're going to try to win your side of the argument, shout me down, cancel my talk, fire me from my job, and my side does the same to your side, and then we can disperse with some of this.
It does feel like that's what we're getting to, which is very frustrating for me as someone who does care about the norms of free speech and what the standards are and making sure people can speak even though I might not agree with them. But you're right that I think that's increasingly becoming like a fringe position.
It's not constitutional, right? In none of these cases are we talking about state actors, although I would argue that some of the congressional efforts to codify what kind of speech is appropriate does start to get to that point. But when we're talking about campus speech issues, when we're talking about who gets to give a speech at the YMCA.
Well, no, if it's a public university, it involves a state actor. They should have free speech rights, and people should.
It's not a public university because it seems like the appetite for talking about what happens at universities in the conservative press is exclusive to Ivy League schools.
Right. Well, but those are, they enjoy, they get.
They're private institutions that are allowed to create their own policies. So these are not actual constitutional issues that we're talking about here. So, I do wonder if we are missing the point of the issue and frankly allowing people to make a case that shields their own politics from judgment by saying, well, what I'm really concerned about is just getting to the truth. Well, it's not the truth. There's not an objective truth here in many cases. So what is it that you believe in, and are you able to defend your belief in that issue without hiding behind the shield of saying this is about misinformation?
Right, but the moral case for a ethos of free speech is a belief that we are more likely to arrive at the truth or determine what is truth if we have broad norms of permissibility for what you are allowed to say and speak without general fear of, yes, being literally, of course, jailed or something for it, but also hopefully not being at risk of losing your job or social stigmatizing to such a degree that you can't exist in the public space, that it's better to be able to express controversial ideas.
And I think we're going round and round and round. This feels like a conversation from 15 years ago, because back then there was this conversation about platforming and who is allowed to platform. And so many conservatives said that you have to platform everybody, whether it's a flat earther, whether it's a QAnon person, whether it's somebody who wants to sit here and tell you that your jacket is green when it's obviously blue, because we're free speech maximalist.
Right.
When cut to today, you have all the people over at, I'm sorry, I always confuse the Daily Wire and the Daily Caller. But Ben Shapiro's,
Daily Wire is Ben Shapiro.
The Daily Wire saying, well, we're an ideological organization. We ideologically are Zionists, and that therefore we can we can fire Candace Owens or not renew her contract, and that is completely above board, and that doesn't implicate any speech issues, and that's just the way it is. Well, they felt very differently when it was Tom Cotton op-ed being rejected. Well, it was accepted, obviously, by the New York Times, but people saying it should not have been because that is a paper with an ideological bent that is allowed to make editorial judgments about what is newsworthy or not. So again, there's absolutely no consistency. I feel like everybody's been exposed for having no consistency, almost everybody, I should say. There are some consistent folks, the Glenn Greenwalds of the world and such out there, but they're in such small number. I do sometimes wish we were just having a fight on the merits.
All right, well, you tell us what you think. More Rising right after this.